Hello and welcome back to the Daily Calm with Pastor Tom. Today I want to talk about a topic that's on a lot of people's minds right now. Maybe you're thinking about it, and it's the topic of haircuts. It's been a while since I've had one. Maybe you're in the same boat. What's the most famous haircut in the whole Bible? I think the most famous haircut in the whole Bible has to be the story of Samson in the Old Testament book of Judges. Do you remember the story of Samson and Delilah? You remember, if you want to go back and read it, it's Judges 13 through 16. You remember Delilah, of course, is working with the enemy, the Philistines, tries to trick Samson, give away your secret of your strength, and he tricks her, and then finally says, look, I'm a Nazirite. Part of a Nazirite vow is that a Nazirite never let their hair be cut. And so you cut my hair, I'll be like anyone else. And sure enough, Delilah cuts his hair in the middle of the night, wakes up, and he's used to just throwing off all the bounds. This time, they capture him. They gouge out his eyes. It's this terrible, tragic story. Now, when I was a kid, maybe the same way, when I was a kid, I used to think that it was all about the hair, that the power was in his hair, right? It was sort of like Samson was like Superman and baldness was his kryptonite. But I realized it's not obviously about the hair. It's about God's power. It's about His Spirit. So what does the hair have to do with it? Well, there's a tragic ending to the story. He's gouged. His eyes are gouged out. He's in the Philistine prison. He's grinding at the mill. And then in Judges 16, verse 22, let me read you this verse. It's this random verse kind of inserted in what looks like the end of the story. But the hair of his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. Now, why would the writers put that in there? I mean, of course hair grows back. That's what hair does. Why would they take time in Scripture to point that out? Well, that's just it. It's not about the hair, it's about the vow. See, the Philistines just assumed that once his hair had been cut, it didn't matter if it grew back in, didn't matter what happened, because the hair represented his Nazirite vow. And once Samson's vow to God was broken, once that vow was broken, never again would God use him. They didn't understand how God works. They didn't understand that Samson's power was not and had never been in the vow Samson made to God. The power is in God's faithfulness to His people. See, way back in the beginning of the story, it says he'll be a Nazirite till the day of his death. In other words, this whole promise rests on God's ability to be faithful to His people, not His people's ability to be faithful to God. Samson had his hair cut, and the Philistines just figured, well, that's how their gods work, right? I mean, you break that vow, that God is going to withdraw His blessing forever. They couldn't imagine the concept of a God who would be faithful to His people even when His people were faithless. And there, in the verses that follow, sure enough, the death of Samson, you may recall, he takes down the temple with God fills him one more time with that strength. What about you? Do you have a Philistine understanding of God? In other words, has it occurred to you that Samson's strength was never in his hair? Samson's great hope was never in his ability to keep his vow to God. The great hope for Samson, the great hope for us, and what this hair and all this is supposed to help us remember, is that God is faithful to His people, even when His people are not faithful to Him.